Hello and welcome to one of many interviews I'll be doing with the game masters who will be running the Summer RPG Week. So it's Summer Role-Playing Game. I'm Lindsay Dwyer and I am the Geek Girl at Keller Williams Mountains to Sound, and I really love sponsoring these sorts of events and putting them on because I get to meet a lot more geeky people, which is always fantastic. And today we are talking with Kenn, who is running the Cyberpunk RED One-shot. So Kenn, go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name is Kenn. I have picked up several nicknames over the years. Kenn Cook from Lindsay herself, and a few others. But I've been a role-playing game nerd for most of my life, and this is where I spend the majority of my free time when I'm not working.
I definitely feel that. How long have you been playing role-playing games?
I started when I was 12, and without giving away my age, it's a lot of decades. But I most of my life, obviously, I took a little bit of time off when having kids and such like that. But I have been really into playing games since D&D Next, which led to 5th edition, and then ran Adventures League tables at the store, Game On in the Southfield Mall for a few years. And then met so many gaming groups that came out of that experience that we still play to this day. So I would say for the last, at least 10, 12 years, I've been playing weekly, regularly, nonstop.
That's fantastic. And how long have you been GMing again?
I've been GMing since the beginning. I'm one of those mostly GM, hardly a player type people. But with the addition of so many gaming groups that I've been involved in the last decade or so, I have gotten a chance to sit on the other side of the screen and be a player. We tend to rotate the DM role throughout anybody who wants to try it. So in those scenarios, I get to be a player. But I would say that I've been GMing for at least 30 years.
Awesome. And I've been fortunate to be in a couple of your games, not all that many. Our schedules always seem to be perpetually not lining up. You're always a fantastic GM. So tell me about the game you're running for the RPG Week.
So this is a new system even for me. I would say that historically I've pretty much stuck with Dungeons and Dragons through several of its iterations, but settling on 5th edition as being the one I've played the most probably. And mostly because of its ease in teaching new players how to play that system. And I was really apprehensive about learning any new systems, even though there are so many great RPGs out there. Jealous of people who had the time and energy to learn so many different systems. But a buddy of mine in one of our D&D tables wanted to try a Cyberpunk game about, I don't know, the beginning of this year. And I decided to go ahead and dive into the rule book and see if it wasn't too hard of a system to learn, and fell absolutely in love with it. It's got to be one of my favorite RPG systems I've heard about, since I don't know that many. I haven't played that many systems other than Dungeons and Dragons, but Cyberpunk is very action driven, very fast paced, and also more narratively focused than many D&D campaigns I've run. I try to bring narration to D&D, but it's more of a combat emulator, I guess, in a lot of ways. But just fell in love with this system. So Cyberpunk RED is a fairly new system. I think it's been out for about 2 years now. An update from Cyberpunk 2020, which came out decades ago. I think it came out in the 80s, to be honest. And this is a refreshing upgrade to that system. I don't know too much about Cyberpunk 2020 other than, reading articles about it. It was very complicated, much like I think 3.5 is. But RED is a more simplified version, kind of like 5th edition is a simplified version of D&D. And it's much easier to grasp the mechanics of. They only use 2 dice, so that makes a lot of things very easy to both adjudicate as a game master and then also as a player. Your options are I'm going to do this skill, so I'm going to roll this one dice. It's not that complicated. But the setting of Cyberpunk is just, I have absolutely fallen in love with it. At the same time as getting involved in the Cyberpunk RED game, I also played the video game, Cyberpunk 2077. So I had a double whammy of getting introduced to this setting, and just absolutely fell in love with the, we'll call it the anti-capitalist sentiment
Yes.
of Cyberpunk. It is a way to really play with those ideas of a society that's degrading to the point where you have wage inequality and life inequality amongst the population, and how do the little people fight back against that oppressive nature of society. So I get to tell those stories, which doesn't come up in D&D very often. So that has been a fun way for me to explore some political and societal ideas in my role-playing games.
I think it gets a little less messy in a modern setting than it does with trying to put it onto fantasy things that have their own baggage from years ago.
Yes. Well, the nice thing too that I like about Cyberpunk specifically is the setting is basically our world. So what's fun about what comes up in games sometimes that we've played is you can take references from the real world, and your character could say that I saw this movie, The Matrix, blah, blah, blah. That exists in a cyberpunk world. Things that happened in our timeline happened in this world as well. The separation in the timeline is somewhere around the early 90s, late 80s, is where certain events happen differently. And the cyberpunk setting took off in a different direction, a more dystopian direction than our current society. But it's all there. So you can draw references from, 80s animes if you want. You can talk about Robotech. It's all relevant in this setting. So it's made a lot of fun player GM interactions in my limited experience so far.
You said it uses 2 dice. Which 2 dice?
It uses a D10 for your skill checks and your attack rolls, essentially. And D6s are for damage.
Excellent. So I just wanted to make sure to share that so people know it's not a D20 system. It is
not a
different.
D20.
So how would you describe your particular GM style?
I would say, let's see, I actually prepared this question because I wanted to know how to best describe this for people that might ask me. I would call myself a mix of both tactical and story focused type of DM. I know that that DM or GMs tend to favor one or the other. I kind of mix both. I like the rules in a system. I like a lot of people would call me a rules lawyer. I don't necessarily like to use that term for myself. I just like to play by a certain set of agreed upon rules so that there's this proper expectation. When I put a challenge in front of players, they know what tools are at their disposal and what they can do to overcome that challenge. But I also like over the top narrative scenes. So if the rules have to be bent slightly to make that narration come off theatrically, I'm willing to do that. I like to build campaigns that are tied to my players in meaningful ways, which I tend to leave breadcrumbs for the players that follow that would lead to either a big reveal or somehow tie back to the characters' backstories in some way. I like to make the players care about the story I'm telling personally for them. Obviously, this depends on player input. So the more you give me, I like to call them daggers, the more things I can twist to bring you into the story. But I also like to set up games that are for players who don't necessarily need to give that much. They're just there to roll some dice and have some fun. So I tend to run session zeros and figure out what my players like, and then build a campaign around something that would satisfy each of the players at the table. In a one-off, I'm going to just throw everything I have at the players, and hopefully people will enjoy that. I like to build stories that have a surprise moment, where things are not as they seem. And I also like to betray my players. Sometimes you think you're working for the good guy when in fact you're working for the bad guy. I like to do those kinds of moments where the players have a, oh crap, what did I get myself into moment. I would say my style also, I do mix theater of the mind and grid plays, types of play. It just depends on the scenario, how complex it is. If it's going to be a, you know, a flying encounter, I might not build a map for that. We might play that theater of the mind, just because of the logistics of trying to do 3D on a 2D surface. So sometimes it's easier to describe that narratively. Uh, let's see, what else can I say about myself? I wouldn't call myself a killer DM. I'll put that in quotes. I've met some DMs that really get a kick out of killing their players. I don't necessarily get a kick out of killing my players, but I don't pull punches. When I play a in-person game or even on Roll20, I don't roll behind a screen. My rolls are out in front. If I crit on you, you get to see that 20 come up, or in this case, a 10 in Cyberpunk Red. And I get to roll my damage, and you get to see what happens to you. I don't like to roll behind the scenes, as it were, because we are playing a game. I like to just go by the game. It's like, you know, you don't hide your rolls when you're playing Monopoly. So why would you hide your rolls when you're playing a role-playing game? But I don't. I sometimes think that character deaths add an element to the story that makes the story more interesting. I always find a way to bring that player back to the table, that narratively makes sense. So I just kind of work around it that way instead of being a killer DM. I do, and lastly, I'll say that I do try to always keep in mind that an RPG is a game first and foremost. It's not a book, so that the media translation is more interactive. I would call it more akin to a video game than a book that you're reading. Even though I like to tell a story, it's a group storytelling effort. We are creating a narrative, but we are also playing a game. So I like to bring that to the table. I like to make sure that, you know, if I feel like there's dead space, or nothing's happening, I'll throw something at the table to get them to act. Sometimes there's what do they call that? Like, there's too many decisions to be made. So you just, your players will pause and be like, I don't know what to do here. I'll instigate something to get them to make a decision, because I like to keep the pace moving. I would say that that's a very thorough description of my style of GMing. Good question, though.
Yeah. It sounds about right from my experience playing in your games, too. Definitely wild situations have happened, but I also think that has come with having a lot of GMs in your games. So we're all pushing the boundaries of what is allowed. So for this adventure, what is the hook for it, and why should someone sign up for this game?
For this particular story, I have decided to create my own. Sometimes I'll use a module for inspiration when or just run a module. Very typically, I won't just run a module the way it's written. I'll just change it to my own. For this particular story, I've kind of written it myself, taking inspiration from a couple different places. But if you like a good mystery that will have a twist, and you enjoy good role play with various NPCs and playing with what I'll call style over substance, which is a big cyberpunk plug. That is basically what this system is built around. You can build min-maxed characters that go after a particular trait. That matters a lot less in Cyberpunk than it does in some other RPGs. A lot of times, how cool you do something is more effective than how well you do something. So if you enjoy that kind of play in a more narratively driven setting, and you benefit from showing off your role-playing finesse, I would say that this game is for you. There will be challenges from all different directions. I'm not going to say there won't be combat. There won't be action. There's going to be all of that. But it's definitely an interesting story that is going to, I think, surprise my players by the end, by bringing in something that you wouldn't expect to see in a dystopian futuristic setting. Welcome to Night City, Chooms. It's the city of dreams, as they say.
Excellent. Yeah. And I do want to just call it, the game is called Bloody Mary. It is Cyberpunk RED One-shot. It is Saturday, August 26th, 12 to 6 p.m. It is the longest game of the week. I think that is appropriate for Cyberpunk, so you can get really into the mood. And also, if you have played Cyberpunk 2077 or any other Cyberpunk game and enjoyed it, probably a game for you to join.
Indeed.
There's not very many other places that you can get that same amount of style over substance.
I will say, in regards to your time, I did sign up for a long block of time expecting that I would have a bunch of new players. So that's what the buffer of time is for, as I may be teaching players how to do certain things before we actually do them. But the game could run shorter. So if you're worried about the 12 to 6 p.m. time frame, it might be over in 4.5 hours. It could be over quicker. I have a story to tell, not necessarily drag it on. So there's some padding in that time.
So that is everything. You're also using the Roll20 tabletop, right?
I'm using Roll20 and Discord for voice. We probably won't use video unless everybody wants to, but it does slow down connections and maps load slower. So if we just use voice and Roll20, that's usually how we play.
Yeah, that's typically my go-to as well. Thank you for watching this brief introduction to Kenn and his game Bloody Mary, a Cyberpunk RED One-shot. So again, you can sign up for all of these games at summer, SUMMER, .geekgirlre, GEEKGIRLRE.com. So summer.geekgirlre.com. And it'll have the full game descriptions as well as content warnings and anything else that you need, as well as all the rest of the games for you to sign up for. Make sure you sign up now so you get the spot and character that you want. Thanks, Kenn.
Thank you, Lindsay. Bye, everyone.